Seattle was a city where the sky was always cloudy, and the rain seemed like a natural continuation of life. Even on the brightest day, when the sun barely broke through the thick veil of clouds, the sense of grayness and tension never left the streets. This city hid many secrets. One of them was hidden deep within the government building at the corner of 3rd Avenue. The building held not only official documents but also numerous intrigues, underhanded games, and corruption that seemed to be a part of the city's very structure. Kamilah Bennett, commander of an elite SWAT unit, was one of those who dedicated her life to upholding the law. From a young age, she dreamed of becoming a guardian of order. Her parents instilled in her respect for the law, and her uncle, who worked in law enforcement, always told her that being a police officer meant being honest and fair, no matter the cost. Kamilah had often heard that real policing was not just about patrols and checks, but a whole world hidden from external eyes. Kamilah grew into a strong woman, ready to fight criminals and herself. She aspired to change the system, but never considered how distorted this system could be. After her unit successfully dismantled several major drug cartels and exposed many smaller criminal gangs, her status in the department became indisputable. But somewhere deep inside, she still had a lingering concern. How long could one believe that the law actually worked? Her doubts began to grow the moment she stumbled upon a strange case. It was one of those routine investigations that shouldn't have raised any suspicions. A local businessman, owner of a chain of stores, complained of threats and extortion attempts. He claimed that unknown individuals were threatening him, but everything seemed like a banal business dispute. Nothing out of the ordinary, but the further Kamilah followed the trail, the more it became clear that this wasn't just about criminals, but about people within the police force itself. Kamilah decided to speak to Thomas Williams, her old friend and assistant prosecutor. He was one of the few who could help her with such cases. He was an experienced lawyer and always had his own methods of dealing with law enforcement structures. When Kamilah entered his office, she immediately felt that something was wrong. "This is an important case," he said, closing the door behind her and inviting her to sit. "But you need to be ready for the fact that there's much more hidden here than you might imagine." Thomas handed her a box of sealed materials. Inside were surveillance footage, correspondence, and several reports that clearly should have been destroyed. This was a case linking several high-profile police officers to major corruption schemes, and apparently the businessman she was dealing with was just a pawn in the game. "Who's behind this?" Kamilah asked, opening one of the reports and skimming over the names listed. "The system," Thomas replied. "But it's not just criminals in uniforms. It's a real network, and it operates on several levels. You might find it, but you'll be fighting a monster that will resist until the very end." Kamilah understood that she had no choice. She had to continue the investigation to uncover what was happening inside her own police department. A few days later, one of her new allies was Paul Jenkins, a young and ambitious officer. He was relatively new to the department, but his work always stood out for good results and honesty. However, he didn't know the heavy consequences he could face by getting involved in this investigation. "Kamilah, I'm not sure I'm ready for this," he confessed when she asked him for help. "We're at the epicenter of something huge. I don't know if I can handle this blow." Kamilah looked at him, seeing the desperation in his eyes. She could understand his doubts. This was not just an investigation. It was an intrusion into a dangerous world where every action could affect a career, and sometimes even a life. "You're needed, Paul. This will be tough, but you're not alone. We'll act together," she said resolutely. "Are you on my side?" Paul exhaled, nodded, and her words gave him confidence. "Yes, I'm with you, Commander." Soon, Kamilah discovered that the system she was facing was much deeper than she had anticipated. It wasn't just a group of corrupt police officers. It was a real network involving not only people in uniform but also officials, businessmen, judges, and even politicians. They turned a blind eye to murders, extortions, and other crimes if it was profitable for them. The deeper Kamilah went, the more she felt the system itself starting to consume her. Every action, every step became more dangerous. They began hiding evidence, intimidating witnesses, and destroying documents. Kamilah and her team were running out of time to gather evidence. They realized that fighting this system would be much harder than they had ever imagined. One day, when they tried to gather more evidence, they ran into Gregory Hunt, a senior officer who had worked within this system for many years and had always remained neutral. But now, he realized he couldn't stay on the sidelines any longer. Gregory was an old friend of Kamilah's, and now, watching how the police system was destroying lives, he decided to help. "Kamilah, I was blind, but now I see. This isn't just a crime. It's a structure. You were right from the start. I can't stay silent anymore. I'll help you expose them," he said with determination, his voice filled with the pain of having been part of this for so long. "Good, Gregory. But remember, we'll answer for everything. And you too, if you're not ready to go all the way," Kamilah replied. Gregory was ready to take the risk. Kamilah needed his experience, knowledge, and contacts within the system. He became an important ally. As the investigation gained momentum, Kamilah began to feel the pressure. Every step she took became more dangerous, and people she once trusted began to look like potential traitors. An incredible amount of evidence lay in her hands, but she couldn't release it without serious consequences. Kamilah knew that if she raised this issue, she would put herself and her team at great risk. But she couldn't stop. Kamilah knew that for her and for the entire city, this was a moment of truth. Now, Kamilah and her team stood on the verge of revealing everything, but she understood that facing the system would not be easy. She felt her resolve frightening her enemies. Every step brought her closer to uncovering the biggest corruption scandal in Seattle's history. And this time, she would fight not only criminals but also those who, seemingly, should protect the law. But in the end, it was she who had to destroy this network, even if it cost her everything. Kamilah was ready to pay the price for the truth. Kamilah Bennett was going through the last stack of documents, as if checking them for errors. Everything she held in her hands was proof that her native system was broken, that everything she had believed in was merely a facade. She took a deep breath and tried to focus. The image of recent events resurfaced in her mind. How she had first stumbled upon this dirty trail and how, step by step, she had led her team down this path. But the further they went, the more control over the situation slipped away. Her office was quiet. The only sound was the nervous clicking of her fingers as they flipped through the pages of the documents, breaking the silence that filled the room. Kamilah sat at the desk, absorbed in her thoughts, when the phone rang. It was Thomas Williams, her old ally and assistant prosecutor, whose help had been indispensable on this journey. "Kamilah, we found something else." His voice sounded hoarse, like someone on the edge of a nervous breakdown. "This could be the key to breaking the whole network. You need to come here as soon as possible." Kamilah closed her eyes, her heart racing faster. Fear wasn't new to her, but now there was something unfamiliar in it. It was something else. An instinct that this chain of evidence would lead to something far greater than just arrests. It would touch the entire system. "I'm on my way," she said, barely cutting the call short. Kamilah quickly gathered herself. She didn't think about the risks again. There was no time for doubts. They had found themselves at the heart of this corruption, and now she had to destroy it. When she reached the prosecutor's office, Thomas was already waiting for her in his office, standing by the window, his face pale from exhaustion. He didn't turn when she entered, and that made Kamilah feel the tension grow. "Kamilah, you need to see this. We found files with correspondence," he said, handing her a tablet with an open document. Kamilah stared at the screen. First, she couldn't believe her eyes. The correspondence between high-profile police officers, officials, and people connected to major corporations showed how they coordinated their actions, covered up criminals, and hid evidence. This was a carefully planned crime that had long exceeded mere corruption. It was a full-blown state conspiracy. "This is worse than I thought, Thomas," she said, feeling a chill run down her spine. "We can't just walk away. We need to act quickly." Thomas nodded, and his eyes filled with worry. "You understand we're stepping into a dangerous game, right? This network stretches beyond Seattle. It affects the whole state. We'll have to expose everyone involved. This isn't just corruption. This is corruption at the highest level." Kamilah knew he was right. They weren't just fighting criminals in uniforms, but those who operated in the shadows, controlling the entire system. This wasn't just a case. It was a full-scale uprising against the power structures. She knew she and her team had put themselves on the line, but now there was no turning back. "We'll continue," she replied firmly, feeling her resolve strengthen. "We'll break this network, no matter what." The next day, Kamilah met with her team again. They were all starting to feel how their investigation was moving beyond ordinary work. Now, they were part of something much larger. Paul Jenkins, despite his inexperience, was beginning to feel the pressure. He was ready to stand for justice, but the consequences were unclear, and their scale only grew the fear within him. "Kamilah, I feel like we're getting close to something huge," Paul said. "Don't you get it? They could kill us. We have no protection. What will we do if they block us on every level?" Kamilah looked at him, trying to discern what was behind his words. He was afraid that much was obvious, but it was the kind of fear that filled everyone who walked this path. "I know it will be scary, Paul. I feel it too, but we can't back down. We can't let this system win," she replied resolutely. "Are you with me?" Paul looked at her, and something in his eyes changed. He knew Kamilah was right. If they backed down, nothing would change. He was with her. "I'm with you, Commander. We'll fight." The story of the criminal network Kamilah was about to confront was becoming darker and more dangerous. When Gregory Hunt, a senior officer, joined the investigation, his experience within the system was exactly what they needed. He had worked inside police structures for years, but now, understanding the true scale of what was happening, he decided to help Kamilah. "Kamilah, I was one of those who turned a blind eye to the system, but now I see how destructive it is," Gregory said when they met. "I can't stay silent anymore. I'm ready to help you expose this conspiracy. We all have to do this." She looked at him carefully. Gregory was an old friend, but was he really ready to fight against what he had built for many years? Kamilah knew it would be hard for him to sever ties with the system. He was at a level where principles often blended with personal gain. But in her voice was a determination, and Gregory knew he couldn't leave her alone. "I won't hide, Gregory, that this is difficult. We're walking on very thin ice, and I can't guarantee that you'll be safe," Kamilah said, her gaze firm and cold. "Are you sure you're ready?" Gregory nodded. "I'm with you, Kamilah. We'll fight." Thus began the real war. Kamilah and her team exposed deeper layers of corruption. Every day brought new evidence, new proof that things were much worse than they had imagined. Police officers, judges, local businessmen, politicians, all were connected in this criminal conspiracy. But the further they went, the more it became clear. Every revelation would cost them not only their jobs but also their lives. They soon discovered that the Silent Shield system, as they called it, wasn't just a local corruption network. It spread throughout the entire state. Moreover, parts of the system reached into neighboring regions. This network was so deeply rooted that even those who tried to break free were drawn into its mechanisms. Every step became more dangerous. They were ready for confrontations, but they never thought their own lives would hang by a thread. With each new step, Kamilah and her team delved deeper into the network of corruption, which, with each piece of evidence, became more and more extensive. Their entire lives and work took on a new meaning. They were not just trying to expose a few criminals. They were fighting the system itself with its mechanisms which had long intertwined and become an inseparable part of society. Fighting this meant battling those who stood behind the laws and regulations, hiding the truth. And now, several weeks after they began their investigation, Kamilah felt the pressure mounting on her shoulders. Was she ready to risk everything for the truth? Questions tormented her, but each time she looked at her allies, at the team that walked with her, those doubts retreated. In their eyes burned determination, and it gave her strength. But the enemies were not sitting idly by. More and more frequently, Kamilah felt the pressure mounting not only from the system but also from those standing beside her. Paul and Gregory had told her more than once that everything was moving too quickly. At any moment, they could run into the one behind all this, and all their efforts would be in vain. One evening, When Kamilah was sitting in her office reviewing new documents, the phone rang. It was Gregory Hunt. "Kamilah, we have a problem." His voice sounded anxious. "We've just received information that they've started hunting us. Someone inside the police has already suspected that we're going too far. They've started trying to eliminate our connections." Kamilah felt her blood freeze in her veins. She knew that this situation would happen sooner or later, but she didn't expect it to come so quickly. "Who?" she asked, trying not to let panic slip into her voice. "It's people from their inner circle. You understand, they're trying to hold on to power at any cost. We need to move faster." She closed her eyes, realizing that now not just the investigation but all of them were under threat. They had all become targets. Their every move would now be tracked. And if they made even one mistake, they would lose everything. "I'm ready, Gregory. We can't stop," she replied, her voice firm. "Prepare the team. We need to move quickly." Day by day, they penetrated deeper into the very core of corruption. And with each new step, it became clear that their opponents were no longer hiding their power. At that moment, Kamilah understood. Now that they had taken this high course, they would have to face not just police officers, but high-profile businessmen and politicians who would not allow them to pass without consequences. The next meeting with her team was crucial. They sat in a hidden room, out of sight, surrounded by files of evidence. Kamilah glanced at everyone. Paul Jenkins, the young officer full of ideals, Gregory Hunt, the senior officer who had now become her ally despite his doubts, and Thomas Williams, the prosecutor who had always helped and guided them. "We're diving deeper and deeper into this," Kamilah began, her voice calm, but the worry in her eyes was evident. "But we can't forget that our task isn't just to expose criminals. We need to break the system itself. Without that, we'll remain in the same place." Paul sighed, his face tense. He had always believed that to fight corruption, they needed to use the law, not go against it. But now, with everything on the line, he had to rethink his views. "Kamilah, I understand that this is necessary, but we're risking not just our careers. If this gets out, you'll be in the crosshairs not just of this group. You understand the entire system could just crush us?" Kamilah looked at him, and despite his doubts, she didn't waver in her decision. "I know, Paul. I know we're risking everything. But I believe that if we don't expose this, we'll lose everything we've done. This isn't just about careers. It's about what we leave behind." Gregory joined the conversation, his face serious and composed. He had long understood that their actions would have far-reaching consequences. However, without his help, they would have hardly managed. "We can't operate in the shadows anymore, Kamilah. We have to bring everything into the light. The sooner, the better. Their attempts to silence us have already begun. We need to reach the top." Her decision was made, and Kamilah felt strength return to her. She was ready. They all were ready. But things were not going smoothly. While trying to gather all the evidence, the team ran into new problems. Documents started disappearing, testimonies vanished from the archive, and anonymous threats began arriving more frequently. Kamilah couldn't help but notice how her team, although willing to go all the way, was becoming increasingly tense and exhausted. Even she began to lose confidence that they could make it through. Everything around them seemed to be collapsing. It was clear that they had encountered a real machine that was not so easily dismantled. One of the most dangerous moments came when they discovered a secret weapons cache belonging to one of the corporations involved in the schemes. This cache was linked to high-profile politicians, and Kamilah realized that the case was taking a whole new turn. Now, her opponents had not only money and power but also military force to protect their interests. They managed to pull out only part of the evidence before the cache was destroyed. Someone from their team had betrayed them and revealed their location. Kamilah knew that this move had been orchestrated from within. Fear reappeared in her eyes, but now that fear became fuel for their resolve. No matter how difficult it was, Kamilah knew there was no turning back. They were up against the shadow of the system, and this fight was not just for the truth, but for the future of the city. Kamilah and her team were moving step by step toward inevitable disclosure. But she knew that for this, they needed to not only fight corrupt officials but also those who continued to stand behind them in the shadows. And each one of them, despite their external strength and power, would sooner or later have to face it. Time was relentlessly passing. Every day brought new challenges, and each new discovery was harder than the last. Kamilah and her team were engulfed by an increasingly suffocating atmosphere of tension and fear. Fear for their own lives, fear for their loved ones, fear that they might not uncover everything before the system ensnared them. Yet, despite all this, her determination remained unchanged. Every step was a step into the abyss, and she could no longer turn back. Gregory Hunt, the senior officer who had now become her main ally, felt the same burden of responsibility. He had long considered the system reliable, but now, thanks to Kamilah, he had witnessed its deepest distortions. Gregory's moral foundation was dissolving, and his world was no longer as black and white as it once was. Kamilah, we're doing everything right, but I'm not sure we'll avoid catastrophe, Gregory said when they were examining new evidence in the prosecutor's office basement. They've noticed us, and every day, they're tightening the noose around us. Kamilah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of this responsibility on her shoulders. More and more, she felt as if someone was watching her, and her actions were becoming increasingly dangerous. I know, Gregory, but we can't stop. We have to continue because if we stop, they win, and then none of the lives we've already lost will mean anything, she said, her voice resolute. Gregory was silent, his gaze weary, but there was still determination in his eyes. He knew that he and Kamilah were standing on the edge, but he couldn't imagine another way forward. However, events unfolded as they had predicted. As Kamilah and her team drew closer to exposing the entire corruption network, their opponents began to act more harshly. Kamilah and her team had to face new threats. It soon became clear that they had become targets not only for those within the network but also for higher powers. Police officers they knew and had worked with for years began to look at them with suspicion. There were rumors that Kamilah and her team had long been suspected of digging too deep. And then, one evening, when Kamilah was driving home after a tense day, a black Jeep cut her off, and within seconds, it blocked her path. The engine roared loudly, and two men dressed in black suits got out, their aggression obvious. "Kamilah Bennett?" one of them asked, his voice low and cold. She didn't respond immediately but noticed how their hands rested on their pistols. Seeing her silence, the second man approached the car, seemingly sizing her up from head to toe. "Why are you poking around where you don't belong?" he asked. "Do you realize we can end all of this? One phone call and it's over, but you'll keep tearing apart everything that gets in your way unless you stop." His words sounded like a threat, but there was a strange bitterness to them. They clearly weren't ordinary criminals. Kamilah knew she was being pursued, but she was still ready to act. She couldn't believe that now she was being hunted not only by criminals but by those who had once been on the side of the law. "You don't understand," she said firmly, not trying to hide the fear she was still feeling. "This isn't just a path. This is a fight, and I will continue. Do you understand that?" They didn't respond, but their faces remained emotionless. One of them took a step back and, without saying another word, returned to the Jeep. Kamilah stood frozen for a few seconds, watching the car disappear into the darkness. This time, she knew they weren't there by accident, and they couldn't lose. They were already on the edge. Soon, Paul Jenkins, the young officer who had initially doubted, but whose resolve now matched that of the senior officers, joined Kamilah. He shared the same doubts as Gregory, but unlike Gregory, he didn't know the full extent of this dirty game. "Kamilah, I've heard they've started hunting you. Are you ready to go all the way? Do you realize this could lead us to big trouble?" Kamilah looked into his eyes and saw how he was truly burning from the pressure. But he was with her. "We're already in this, Paul. We can't get out. This isn't just an investigation. This is a war. And if we don't continue, we'll end up on the other side of the barricades." She felt her voice becoming firmer. "We have to expose it all." Paul nodded, his face tense, but determination burned in his eyes. After that conversation, they began planning the strategy that would lead them to victory. Kamilah and her team had to gather more evidence, find connections between corrupt police officers and influential people. They knew they were risking much, but everyone was ready to pay the price. However, their enemies weren't sitting idly by. Kamilah soon realized that someone within her team was linked to them. She sensed it immediately when, during one of their closed meetings, one of the participants acted suspiciously. At that moment, Kamilah had to make a decision: who she would continue with and who she would not. The feeling of betrayal clenched inside her, but she knew that even in the most difficult situations, she had to stay on the side of the truth. Soon, Kamilah faced the hardest choice of her life. One of her team members had been working against her. When she first found out about it, her heart stopped. She couldn't believe this had happened. For a long time, this person had been her ally, her friend, a part of her team. But now everything had changed. Kamilah had to decide what to do next. "You betrayed us," she said to him, standing in the hallway outside his office. His face was tense, but he didn't say a word. Kamilah continued, "You were with us, and now you're with them. Why?" His silence was answer enough. Kamilah couldn't believe this person had betrayed her and the whole team. "You knew what we were doing," she continued, her voice becoming hoarse with bitterness. "You knew that if we exposed everything, we would destroy not only the criminals but the system itself. You were part of this fight. You knew that if you betrayed us, you betrayed justice itself." But he remained silent. Kamilah understood that her battle with the system would now not only be against external enemies but also within her own team. And this was the hardest test for her. The more they uncovered the truth, the greater the pressure on them became. It soon became clear that they couldn't be stopped. Kamilah had managed to gather enough evidence to bring the whole truth to light. But just when they were ready to make their final push, their team suffered a major blow. That evening, their office was raided. All the computers were destroyed. The documents were burned. Only a few pieces of evidence remained in the hands of Kamilah and her closest allies. At that moment, she realized that not all of her team would survive this war. Those who had survived the betrayal and remained loyal to the cause continued their work. But for some, it was all over. Kamilah looked at her allies, knowing that this war was far from over. After the raid that destroyed all their digital evidence, Kamilah and her team found themselves on the brink of collapse. Their investigation had taken a terrible blow, and it seemed like their plan to expose the entire corruption network had crumbled. However, despite the physical destruction of the evidence, Kamilah refused to give up. This blow only strengthened her resolve. She knew that if they didn't continue, the criminals behind the conspiracy would continue to rule for a long time, and those who tried to expose the truth would remain in the shadows. Kamilah sat in her office, feeling a cold fear and rage grip her heart. Time was running out, and they might have been too close to revealing everything. But now the enemy had begun to act openly. Those who were connected to the system no longer hid their intentions. They knew they would be exposed, and now they were ready to take extreme measures. "They're no longer playing by the rules," Kamilah thought, looking at the empty monitors and burned documents. "But I can't let them win." She knew that they had little time to act. The surveillance camera at the warehouse, which had captured the evidence, was their last hope. However, they knew that to protect themselves, they needed to find a way to trace those behind the conspiracy. Meanwhile, one of her allies, Paul Jenkins, began noticing troubling signs. He couldn't believe that someone in their team could be working against them. But with each passing day, the suspicions became more and more obvious. Kamilah was concerned. Were there traitors among them? And if so, which member of her team could be on the side of the enemy? But now was not the time for such questions. "Kamilah, we need to take action," Paul said, as they discussed their next steps. His voice was tense, and his eyes were filled with worry. "We can't let these people stay one step ahead. We need to find new allies. Maybe someone from the outside will support us." Kamilah nodded. They couldn't rely on their old methods. Everything they had done until now was predictable to those who controlled the system. Now, to win, they needed to operate within new frameworks. Perhaps it was time to look beyond their own police force and reach out to independent groups who could support them in their fight. But it soon became clear that those who stood against Kamilah and her team had started using media platforms for their own game. More and more false accusations were appearing in the press. The story of Kamilah and her team, allegedly manipulating evidence, began to spread. Some journalists working on commission started publishing scandalous articles about them. The city began to doubt the integrity of the investigation. The massive disinformation campaign was already in full swing, and Kamilah knew that if they didn't respond publicly, all their work would be destroyed in the eyes of society. Staying quiet was impossible. In this situation, they needed to act decisively and openly. "We have to go public," Kamilah told her team. "We can't let them tear our reputation apart. We have to show everyone that we're doing this for the truth, for justice." Soon, they decided to hold a press conference, where Kamilah and her team could present their evidence and clearly respond to all the accusations. It was a risky move because they didn't know how the public would react. But if they didn't take this step, all their work would be for nothing. The press conference was scheduled for the next morning. At the conference, Kamilah appeared confident, despite the gravity of the situation. She stood before the camera, her voice firm and resolute. Kamilah talked about everything they had found, the evidence they had gathered. She spoke with such sincerity that even those who doubted began to reconsider. "We've uncovered a system that ran a parallel world of crime and corruption," she said. "Those involved in this conspiracy tried to destroy all the evidence and stop us. But we won't be silent. We can't allow these people to hide in the shadows." Kamilah and her team presented the surviving evidence: videos, witness testimonies, and independent reports confirming their work. Despite the media campaign against them, she felt confidence slowly returning. Kamilah wasn't just exposing the enemies inside the system. She was openly declaring her readiness to fight for the truth. When the press conference ended, the public reaction was mixed. Some supported Kamilah, while others continued to doubt. But the important thing was that Kamilah and her team had won their first battle. Their evidence started to be re-examined, and many began to reconsider their views. Meanwhile, Kamilah's enemies weren't ready to give up. They knew they would be exposed, and they started to take bigger steps. One of their next targets was Thomas Williams, the prosecutor who had been helping Kamilah all this time. He unexpectedly found himself at the center of a media scandal. Some journalists started publishing old data about his personal life, his connections with politicians, and past mistakes. In this fight, there were no rules. Kamilah understood that Thomas was now in danger, but she couldn't let his downfall affect the case. He was their last support in the government, and if he was pressured, they would lose everything. Thomas decided to make a public statement. He declared that he would continue supporting the investigation and helping expose the corruption. It was a brave decision because it meant he could no longer remain in the shadows. Soon, his support for Kamilah became clear to everyone. However, their enemies weren't stopping. Real threats began to emerge. Kamilah received an anonymous letter, stating that she and her team would be destroyed if they didn't stop. "We know where you live. We know who your friends are. You won't be able to hide if you continue to go against us." Each new letter, each new move by the enemies, became increasingly dangerous. Kamilah knew they were facing powerful forces, and each step could be their last. But she couldn't back down. Kamilah was ready to fight to the end because she knew this war wasn't just for her future. It was a war for the future of everyone who believes in justice and the law. With each step, each new piece of evidence, they got closer to the truth. And even though the enemies tried to drag them into darkness, Kamilah knew that she and her team carried the light that would illuminate the way for future generations. The chapter has turned, and now Kamilah must decide who among her allies will endure until the end, and who will betray them at the very last moment. And at what point she will be forced to make that choice, one that will turn everything upside down, including her own moral principles. But one thing was clear: the war with the system never ends easily. With each new day, the pressure on Kamilah's team grew more intense. Their investigation, despite all their efforts, still faced resistance. Not only from criminal groups trying to cover their tracks, but also from those who were supposed to protect the law. They were surrounded by enemies on all sides. Within the police, among politicians and businessmen, and even within their own ranks. The enemies were becoming increasingly aggressive. Kamilah felt that every day was bringing her and her team closer to something terrible. She knew that at any moment, one of their allies could be exposed, and their operation could be derailed. And it was then that she received a new warning. Thomas Williams, the prosecutor who had supported her and her team throughout this fight, became the main target. Compromising articles based on his past began to appear in the media, and while these accusations were false, public opinion began to shift toward doubt. People started questioning. Was Thomas really as clean as he seemed? Kamilah knew that if they didn't protect him, not only their case but the future of the investigation would be at risk. Kamilah gathered her team in her office. Her nails were bloodied from the tension, and her eyes had lost their brightness. The moral burden was becoming heavier. They couldn't let the system take them down one by one. "We have to protect Thomas," Kamilah said resolutely, clenching her fist on the table. "If we give him up, we lose everything. He's our last stronghold in the system. We'll continue, despite the media attacks, threats, and those who betray us." Paul Jenkins, the young police officer, nodded, clenching his fist, but his eyes betrayed his concern. "Kamilah, do you really think we can keep going? We're already on the edge. Lies and corruption are creeping into every level. Don't you see how they're trying to burn us out?" Kamilah looked at him, her gaze firm. She couldn't let fear and doubt consume her. They couldn't afford to back down. "We don't give up. Never. This isn't about whether we can continue. It's about whether we have a choice. If we stop, we'll be like all those people who let the system destroy their morals. You can't let them win, Paul." Paul was silent for a few seconds, then took a deep breath. "I'm with you, Commander. We'll go to the end." Meanwhile, events began to unfold quickly. Kamilah knew they could no longer work in secrecy. They had to bring everything into the light. But the problem was that the enemies were too powerful and influential to fight them openly. Kamilah and her team had to find new ways to bypass their blockades and threats. They began to work more actively with independent journalists, human rights organizations, and activists. It was a risky move, but it was the only way they could gather all the evidence needed to completely expose the corruption and make high-profile criminals face justice. But while they worked, new tragic events unfolded. One of the witnesses who was ready to testify against high-profile police officers was found dead. Her body was discovered on the outskirts of the city, and local authorities immediately closed the case as an accident. Kamilah knew this was no accident. Someone was trying to intimidate their team, and it only strengthened her resolve. "We can't let them stop us," she said when they discussed the witness's death. "We have to continue, or her death will be meaningless. If we don't expose them, they'll destroy even more." Paul and Gregory nodded. Kamilah could see how they were struggling for each person who was ready to testify. But they all understood that in their hands lay not only the lives of the witnesses but the future of society itself. One of the most decisive moments in the investigation came with the discovery of Nicholas van der Lee, a police officer who worked within the very heart of the corruption. Nicholas was part of an elite unit that controlled most of the operations that covered up illegal activities involving high-profile businessmen and politicians. Kamilah knew that his testimony could be the key to fully unraveling the criminal network. Kamilah met him in a secluded place, a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. He was nervous, constantly looking around, as if trying to make sure no one was watching him. But even in such a state, he couldn't hide that he could no longer stay silent. "They devoured me, Cam. I was one of them, but I can't anymore." His voice trembled. "Everything I've done has no justification. They use us like pawns. I was part of the game, but I don't want to be part of their world anymore." Kamilah sat across from him, feeling the adrenaline surge in her blood. This was the moment she had waited for. "Nicholas, if you're ready to help us, you know what you're going to lose. You can't go back. We can't let you hide. You have to be ready to go all the way," she said firmly. Nicholas nodded, his eyes filled with remorse. "I'm ready. It will cost me everything. But I want this to end. I can't stand watching this in action anymore." From that moment on, Nicholas became one of the key witnesses in the investigation. His testimony became the foundation for the final strikes against the system. Kamilah knew they couldn't conduct the investigation openly until they destroyed the internal structure of the criminals. He gave them what they needed, the information about the highest echelons of corruption. Soon, amid the immense pressure that never ceased, Kamilah and her team had gathered enough information to bring the whole truth to light. But they knew their enemies would not give up easily. One by one, high-profile police officers, politicians, and businessmen began to retreat into the shadows. Kamilah understood that the investigation had entered its final stage. Their opponents began to sense the threat. It was clear that their campaign to destroy Kamilah and her team had only just begun. None of them could be certain of their safety. Kamilah knew they could win, but for that, they had to act cohesively, leaving no room for mistakes. "We won't make it through this without losses," Kamilah said to her team, standing in her office that night as they prepared for the final strike. "But we can win, and we will win because this truth will be heard. We'll dismantle the system, but we'll do it openly, not hiding." This was the beginning of the end. The coming days revealed just how fragile the power of those trying to hide behind the walls of corruption was. Kamilah and her team realized that the end of this battle was just the beginning of a new path for the city. In the following weeks, the city descended into chaos. Kamilah and her team faced not only media attacks but also real threats. Kamilah felt herself becoming not only a target for the press but also for those lurking in the shadows. She couldn't afford to back down. She and her team were walking the edge of a cliff, and with each step, the distance between them and those trying to hide the truth grew smaller. Kamilah understood that she could no longer return to her old life, to the world she once knew. This fight had become a part of her very essence. Thomas Williams, her loyal ally, like everyone else, found himself under pressure. His reputation had been tarnished by countless rumors, and each new day brought him more accusations. His life was now in the hands of those who stood against Kamilah, and Kamilah couldn't let that happen. He was her last stronghold within the system, and without him, their chances of victory would be minuscule. During those days when Casimir, one of the city's highest-profile politicians, was finally arrested thanks to the evidence provided by Nicholas van der Lee, the situation took a new turn. Kamilah and her team had managed to obtain evidence that connected him not only to police officers but also to powerful businessmen who financed illegal activities. These new pieces of evidence, authentic video recordings of meetings, letters, and documents that left no room for doubt, became the basis for the arrest of Casimir and his closest associates. When Kamilah managed to announce this to the press, the city was engulfed in a storm. Protests, rallies, and political debates over the justice of the events became increasingly fierce, dividing the public. Casimir turned out to be not just a political leader but a true symbol of corruption, parasitic on the system. However, the joy of this first important step was soon overshadowed by a new challenge. Kamilah received fresh threats. Their investigation had turned into an all-out war with the system, which continued to resist with stubborn determination. With each step, Kamilah felt her personal life, her relationships with loved ones, beginning to fall apart. Her family, friends, and colleagues, all of them were feeling the consequences of her struggle. Kamilah was growing distant from them, knowing that her actions would inevitably bring about sacrifices. One day, she received a phone call from her mother. Her mother asked her to stop to end the fight. The mother who had supported her all this time was now afraid for her daughter's life. Kamilah remained silent on the other end of the line, not knowing what to say. She knew that her work was putting her loved ones at risk, and although her mother had always been her support, at that moment, Kamilah felt how her own actions were driving a wedge between her and the people who had once been closest to her. "Mom, I can't stop. This isn't just my choice," Kamilah finally spoke. "I can't be the person who just bends before the system. I can't let my actions be meaningless. We have to destroy it from within." She felt her words echo in the emptiness of the night, but what could she do? Walk away from all of this, knowing that their fight wouldn't end until they exposed the entire system they were living in? She couldn't. Kamilah knew that her path wasn't just her own choice. It was a responsibility. Despite the initial successes that Kamilah and her team had achieved, the enemies did not stop. Casimir turned out to be not the only high-profile criminal, and the system, though it seemed on the verge of collapse, was even stronger than they had imagined. Kamilah began to realize that their fight was not just against city-level corruption, but against a vast network that could pull in even more people. The process was long and painful. Kamilah had to face inevitable betrayals, not just from her friends and colleagues. As she found herself at the heart of the legal battles, she began to understand that they had encountered a much larger, international network, involving not only local officials but also far more powerful players capable of manipulating the global economy and politics. "We can't stop now," Gregory said, looking at Kamilah in the office after they received new data on the connections of high-profile criminals. "We're getting closer to the exposure. Now we need to play their game. And if we don't, we'll just become part of their system. And I can't let that happen." Kamilah silently nodded. She was ready for the next step, the next decisive strike. But it became clear to her that her life would always be in a state of suspension. This battle would last until they broke the system. And even if she lost everything, she would not regret it. The day came when Kamilah and her team decided to release all the evidence and proof they had gathered. It became the culmination of all their work, dozens of hours of investigation, countless threats, and dangers. Kamilah knew that at this moment, there was no turning back. Everything they had collected had to be brought to light. On television screens, in newspapers, on internet platforms, the full truth about corruption in government and corporate circles was now exposed. Kamilah and her team could be proud that they had finally shown the world how deeply entrenched the crimes were. They hadn't just uncovered a few isolated cases. They had torn apart a system that had hidden its dark secrets for decades. However, that day did not become a victory for Kamilah in the usual sense. Every step she took, every revelation, poisoned her personal life. She lost many allies, her family turned away from her, and her actions became the cause of a political crisis. But it was necessary. Kamilah remained true to her ideal. They won this battle, but the war continued. And Kamilah knew that, in order to build a better future, they would have to endure many more trials and tribulations. The process of reforms that began after the case was exposed turned out to be long and painful. But Kamilah still felt that they had made the right step. She became a symbol of change. Many citizens of the city came to realize that their system didn't just require changes. It needed a complete overhaul. Despite her personal losses, Kamilah continued working. She could no longer be the person she once was. She had lost a lot but gained much more, an understanding that the victory in this fight was worth all the sacrifices. Her final step was not just the completion of the investigation. It marked the beginning of a new stage in her life, a life in which she became part of real change, even if that change was painful and difficult. Kamilah accepted her fate and understood that her struggle was far from over. This was just the first step towards a better future for the city. Victory? Perhaps. But she already knew that each step forward would require even greater determination and strength. And Kamilah was ready to continue. With each passing month after the case was exposed, Kamilah's life became more and more complicated. The city was shaken, the power structure wavered, but, as always, change did not come quickly. Kamilah's enemies, though enduring difficult times, began to retreat, but in their place, new ones appeared. Those who had once been untouchable were now looking for ways to regain their influence and cover up their crimes.